Is it one light or two? All right, whatever. Good evening. The hour of 6 p.m. having arrived, I call to order this regular meeting of the Municipal Services, Facilities, and Infrastructure Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel. The video is also posted on the city website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Copies of the printed agenda are available in the wall pockets just as you enter the room. The public and other city councilors will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. I will not recognize an individual a second time until everyone else has had a chance to speak. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room, identify yourself by name and address prior to speaking. Written comments from the public will be accepted at the clerk's office until Tuesday, 1 p.m. I now call to order this meeting, and I notice that there is a quorum present. Council Roberts is not with us, but we do have our quorum. And what else do we have here? Okay, the first item on our agenda is a communication from Councilor Phil Jones asking about a resolution in support of a Protect Our Police bill. Councilor Jones, can you elaborate?
Thank you, and I'll be short, but I think this is very important. I know you all have a copy of my original memo in front of you, and if we could go backwards, look at the background first before we go to the actual recommendation. What we're trying to do here is ask the state to outlaw bullets that'll pierce armor, the same armor that we buy for our police at $800 a vest. The same thing we have shields for there and armored vehicles and so on. This isn't just one of those social resolutions. This is we are the stewards of the police. So we're trying to help our own police as well as every other police agency within the state. I don't see a reason why we need this kind of bullets available to the public. If you ever don't want to see what these people do, one of these recent school shootings, the shooter used them, and so the children that were hit by the person, they couldn't even be identified because it explodes when it hits them and makes such a big gash. They couldn't identify him facially. It knocked their shoes off. They couldn't identify him by the clothes. And it took over an hour for parents to be notified of when their children were not available to them anymore. It's just, I don't understand why it's not a law right now. Moving on, I'll move up to the recommendation. My recommendation is that the Keene City Council authorize staff to draft a resolution in support of a Protect Our Police bill. I branded it that on purpose. I could have just said amend 59 RSA 159A, but you get more attention when you brand it, and I didn't want to make it sound like we were doing something about gun control. It's more about protecting our police. And that's all we're doing. So the resolution would be sent to all state elected officials requesting that legislation be enacted and supported, which would outlaw the owning, storing, buying, selling, distributing, manufacturing, or custom making of any gun loading ammunition designed to penetrate bulletproof armor. This has already been in the news. I've already got replies from all over. 97% positive, because there was an article in the Sentinel, and New Hampshire Public Radio picked up on it, and I did get a lot of feedback. The negative feedback gave me good reason to support this, from what I heard. Even more, I want to support it after what was said to me in the negative feedback. So I'm proud to be presenting this. I think it's very easy. I think we, as I call us the stewards of the police, whatever you want to call us, it's our job to protect the police wherever we can. And I don't understand why the RSA only calls for that it be unlawful when used in a crime. Then it's too late. We want it off the street. We don't want it used in a crime and then confiscate and outlaw. And I would gladly take any questions.
Any committee questions at this point? Okay, I'd like to ask City Attorney for any comments, and then perhaps the Police Chief.
All right, yeah, thank you, and you should speak to the Police Chief. Just a couple of comments on it. I mean, I did talk to the counselor before he submitted this and told him it was something that the City Council would need to think about. There are two statutes at play with respect to this. The one has been referenced by Councilor Jones, 159-18, felonious use of Teflon-coated armor-piercing exploding bullets and cartridges. As the counselor pointed out, it's unlawful. It's Class B felony if he uses or attempts to use any of these, and they're Teflon-coated armor-piercing bullets or cartridges in the course of committing any misdemeanor or felony. So it's not currently unlawful to, possess them or to transfer them, buy them, sell them, do whatever, as long as you're not doing it in commission of a felony or a misdemeanor. The other statute to point out, which is the reason why the counselor is suggesting that this happened by legislative action, is RSA 159:26. That's the state preemption of any local bylaw or ordinance with respect to the sale, purchase, ownership, use, possession, transportation, licensing, permitting, taxation, or other matter pertaining to firearms, which includes ammunition. So the state has basically taken upon itself the sole right to regulate that in any manner.
Which is why I couldn't ask for an ordinance.
Exactly, which is why the counselor is suggesting that it has to be through legislation. And whether or not the City Council as a group wants to support that request is certainly up to the City Council at this point in your recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Counselor.
Thank you. I just have one question about the RSA. It talks about Teflon-coated bullets, but I think Teflon is a brand name that refers to the same stuff you use on frying pans. Is that written into the RSA?
Yes.
Are we?
It's written that way.
So if there's some other non-stick solution that can be put on a bullet, is that also covered by this?
That's a good question. I actually did a little bit of digging about armor-piercing bullets, whatever they're called. The statute does specifically use the phrase Teflon-coated or armor-piercing. Now, the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, did put out a special advisory in 2015 in which they tried to, I think, define a little bit better for purposes of the Gun Control Act of 1968. That's when they actually did these things, apparently. But to define what an armor-piercing projectile is, and what this definition says is a projectile which is constructed entirely from one or a combination of tungsten alloy, steel, iron, brass, bronze, beryllium, copper, or depleted uranium. And then there's another definition that deals with a jacket weight of more than 25%. So our definition in the state seems to be narrower than that, but apparently these types of projectiles are also covered by the Gun Control Act. Query at that point, and I think this police chief could speak more to this if he so chose. As you know, there was recent legislation adopted by the state which essentially limits the ability of local law enforcement to enforce gun legislation or gun-related legislation or rules. So I suspect that even if an individual were in violation of the Gun Control Act, that violation would have to, if it didn't trigger RSA 159:18, would have to be in connection with some other state-related offense at that point. So the short answer is I think that the state would probably need to, if they are going to adopt legislation on this, look pretty carefully at what the definition of an armor-piercing round is. But the ATF has at least tried to provide us with that.
Thank
Thank you.
Just,
Yeah.
City Attorney, just a legal question following what you just said, where I know the state is trying to do legislation saying that we can ignore federal law, but state law supersedes local law and federal law supersedes state law. So how would that work? Doesn't federal law supersede a state law? Can the state actually come in and say you can violate a federal law if you don't like it?
No,
Okay.
no. The federal law is still supreme, and remember, it also applies, state law federal law may incorporate state law to some extent, so there couldn't be a bleed over between the two of them.
Because I did read where concerning gun laws, the state was trying to say, well, if we disagree with this, we're not going to follow federal law. But they are still, no matter what they say, they're still obligated to follow federal law. I am correct with that.
Yes, and just to tune that up a little bit, I mean, the state action didn't say that you can violate federal law. What the state action said was that local law enforcement shouldn't assist federal law enforcement agencies, and the chief can tune me up on this too, but shouldn't assist federal law enforcement agencies in the enforcement of federal gun laws unless it triggers an underlying state violation of some type.
Thank you.
And Tom, I think it already is, the state law already is much more strict than the federal law
On which, Counselor?
on the use of penetrating bullets.
Well, again, the state law only applies in the connection with the use of the bullets. My understanding under the ATF rules and under the Gun Control Act is that they are generally unlawful under federal law. I think Steve can answer that, but I think that that's the case, that you're not supposed to possess them. I remember actually when this debate was occurring many years ago, because my family, most of them are law enforcement officers, and they had a particular interest in this.
So that would be even better than we could comply with federal law.
Well, you still have to have the state requirements in place with
Yes.
respect to it, right?
It'd be good if they agree, though.
Chief, can we hear from you, please? Your thoughts. Good evening.
Steve Russo, Police Chief. For 5 more days.
We're going to miss
I'm
you.
going to try and make sure I follow this along. And Tom or Amanda, please jump in. The statute that was just enacted, I don't have in front of me, I don't know if it says should not or shall not, was my understanding is we cannot assist or enforce federal laws. And there's many federal laws that we cannot enforce anyway, whether they're a federal law or not, such as immigration, and we've been all through that. We have no interest in enforcing that. We can't arrest somebody on a federal law. If we have something else to hold them, and we can call the ATF and say, this guy's got a machine gun, which that's a bad example because that's actually against the statute. We can't just arrest or investigate federal violations of federal laws. And the problem with that statute that Tom brought up is it does affect gun-free school zones and what we can act on there and how we interact with the SAUs, and it's a very complicated subject. And domestic violence cases, so that's problematic on another thing. As to if somebody has Teflon-coated bullets, we can't arrest them on that just because it violates a federal law. We can gather information if they want to give us their information and forward it to the ATF. And I'm not familiar enough with that to know if it's outright. I didn't think it was illegal because you get a $200 stamp, you can buy an automatic weapon, you can buy silencers and all kinds of stuff. And I just want to make sure you all understand. Ballistic vests are made at different levels. Okay, so there's some that will stop up to X amount of handgun. None of them are going to stop any caliber rifle rounds unless you have plates. So, and the armor piercing may or may not, depending on how big your plate is. So it's not one size fits all. We outlaw this. Some of these rounds from a higher caliber weapon are going to go right through the plates that we have, what we call heavy vests. So it's not really a good idea to have them on the street, but as to regulate them, I don't think unless there's a state statute, we can actually regulate anything along those lines based on a federal law.
Which is what we're asking for.
Yes.
Any questions for the chief? Yep.
Hi. Thank you, Chief. In your opinion, in stops and experiences of your officers, how much of a need is this? How often are you seeing this type of paraphernalia?
I can't remember the last time it's ever been brought to my attention, either when I was patrol officer or supervisor. and we've helped confiscate a lot of guns, doing narcotics investigations, regular investigations, domestic violence cases. I don't recall ever coming across some of these rounds. They're very expensive. And it's like a lot of things, unfortunately, the truth is people that want them are going to get them. I couldn't imagine how much some of these things cost. I can't even afford to buy my own ammo anymore to go shooting. It's so expensive. But is there a need? It's only one time when that need may be, but unfortunately in society now it's going to be available to people that want to get it. It's going to cause a lot of people to start saying, oh, against my Second Amendment, so I should be able to buy this and that. I'm not a hunter. I don't shoot that much anymore. I'm not as familiar with some of the rounds that are out there, as Tom did some investigating. But I don't know why the public would need that, but people are going to say it's their right. You know, I don't want to shoot a $5 round down range just to see it go through a piece of steel. That's not my idea of economic prudence, but it's just me.
Can
Yeah.
I do a follow-up?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then my assumption is Keene has the Bearcat. If we suspected there was going to be an arrest or a search warrant or some law enforcement activity where the alleged perpetrator the environment may have these type of weapons and paraphernalia, we would anticipate that, or?
Correct. We do, our operations aren't just thrown together. We do a risk assessment for every operation, and that tells us what level of people and equipment we need to bring. So definitely if we've got someone that has long guns, maybe some non-normal ammunition, then we would ramp up what we need to do. Correct. But some of these rounds will go through the Bearcat or any other armored vehicle that anybody in the state has, through the windows. We're pretty strong depending on the caliber rifle you put it in.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the chief? Okay. In that we are in discussion, if there are any members of the public that want to join the conversation, or council is present? Well, I guess not. Councilor Jones, what I'm wrestling with, I don't think any of us really are in support of this armor-piercing ammunition in any shape, manner, or form. What I'm wrestling with is this city council business? I use the expression, we're hired to deal with basketballs and potholes and water, public works type issues. This is state business, in my mind. So if you can maybe outline why and how. My first thought was we should all write letters individually to our state reps. So.
Can I answer that in two ways?
Yeah, give me all, yeah.
The first is, the issue already came before the council about resolutions on state and federal business, and the council said, yes, we want to do it.
Okay.
So that answers your first question. The second question is, we have a police department. It is city business. We oversee, I said stewards, I don't know if that's the proper word, but yes, I think it's our duty to help protect our own police officers. So yes, I think it is city business.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And can I add one more thing? If this, just for the background notes, if the city council does pass this resolution, I would ask that it be sent in writing to all of our local Keene legislatures and electronically to all across the state, which is done by the push of a button. It's easy nowadays. I've already contacted a whole bunch of legislatures on this who are in favor of it.
Okay, well, you just answered a question that I was thinking. Because, surely with the herd of state reps that we have, that would be quite a burden for the clerk's office. But as you said, if it could go electronically, then
That's all I'm asking.
that wouldn't be bad. So anything further from the public, or anyone else want to comment? So committee, what are you thinking?
Well, just a couple of issues. One issue I'll agree with Councilor Jones on is, and I've always said it's city business if a constituent brings it forward. To me, it never matters what the issue is. if a constituent wants to bring something forward and we think it's frivolous, well, it only takes the committee 5 minutes to realize it's frivolous, and we vote, we vote it down. So I don't really mind issues coming forward from any constituent. If they think it's important enough to bring to the city council, I encourage them to do that. On this particular issue, I do morally agree completely with Councillor Jones. I'm just struggling with the legality more, though, with the state and the federal part of it. So morally, 100% on board here. I'm just a little bit confused to where we go with this now based on state law and federal law and comments the chief made. I mean, if Councillor Jones wanted to approach staff and, basically come up with a resolution, which is more of a moral resolution, I'd be 100% on board with that. I'm just kind of questioning how far we can go legally here. That's all. I don't want to write a legal resolution when we know, it's not going to hold up in the courts anyhow, but sometimes we write moral resolutions. We've done it on climate control. It was a moral resolution. We didn't like what went on, and we sent out a resolution saying, we disagree with what's happening. So we could do the same here, but we would know that it's not going to really have teeth in court. But hey, we've written moral resolutions before, and I'd certainly have no problem backing a moral resolution here.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just to clarify, in fairness to Councilor Jones, he's not requesting that the city council either adopt a resolution prohibiting these things or an ordinance prohibiting these things. What he's requesting is that the city council communicate to the state legislature a request to enact legislation to deal with the issue. So at this point, it's purely a legislative question. It wouldn't be something that would bring us over into the Superior Court or something like that. It's purely to request the enactment of legislation.
If I can follow up on that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. To Councilor Jones, I don't think I'd send a resolution to this current legislature up in Concord because they probably couldn't find a trash can to throw it in quick enough. But maybe after the election, you might have a majority that'll listen to you. So that's just my little political blurb on there.
Okay. Councilors?
Just to say, I support this. Thank you for bringing it forward. I think it's important that we make a statement that says, if the state is going to have one law and then refuse to enforce federal laws, it would be a lot better if the state law and the federal law were aligned then, so that the state can enforce the federal law. We can do that at a local level. Thank you.
Kat, anything?
I just want to thank Councillor Jones for bringing this forward. The questions I was asking was more for the public knowledge and just to clarify the need here in our city for the public safety aspect versus really going on statewide and even federal-wide saying, again, I support this. I don't think that these things should be available as they are. And we've seen the destruction that they have done. So I'm in support of this. My question about how much time and money it would cost the city to write and draft this was answered to my satisfaction. So I will support asking the state to do more about this issue. Thank you.
So as a change to the potential option one of potential solutions to this, changing the word draft a resolution, draft a communication would be more appropriate. Councilor Jones, good?
I'm fine with that. yeah.
Okay, and
As long as it
and just to
meets the
react
same
to-
purpose.
To react to Councilor Filio's comment, when do you want this to go out?
Well, I would think the sooner the better. I would think
Me too. Yeah.
sometimes it's better to get people to act on this before election time. Plus, the way they work, they have deadlines where they have to get bills on the table. And it would be hard for a new council, a new legislature to get it there. Isn't it by December or something? They have,
Yeah, there are two, the House side of states and the Senate side.
Okay,
so there, it is somewhat time sensitive.
Okay, so as soon as possible. Council Williams, you ready to make a motion?
Yeah.
Based on that?
Move to recommend that the city council authorize staff to draft a communication in support of a Protect Our Police bill. The communication would be sent to all state officials requesting that legislation be enacted and supported which would outlaw the owning, storing, buying, selling, distributing, manufacturing, or custom making of any gun-loading ammunition designed to penetrate bulletproof armor.
Second.
So there's a motion by Council Williams and a second by Council Filio. Anything from the public? Committee?
Yeah, go ahead.
What?
So I would like to request one slight change.
One more time?
I'd like to request a slight change in the motion. The motion talks about being sent to all state officials, which is really broad. So I want to make sure I meet your intent. And you're speaking about the members of the House and the Senate.
Yes?
Yes.
Correct, and as I said, in writing only to the locals and electronically to the,
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Full houses.
State officials would be,
yeah.
right down to DPW or something. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, duly seconded, all in favor? We are unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay, next item on our agenda is regarding a communication that I sent in. As I said in my communication and conversation with former Counselor back there, Redfern, we got to talking about the new Pat Russell Park on Carpenter Street. We got to talking a little more about all of the city parks. And we got to talking about the drug problem that is rampant in this city. I've encountered a number of really bad situations. It's out there, and we need to protect at least areas where kids are on a regular basis. So, Councilor Redfern, if you can come forward and maybe elaborate a bit more. In conversation with the city manager and city attorney, I know that there's some conversation going on about designation of what is a city park and what our rights and responsibilities are in enforcing rules at them. So I think we're going to take this so far and then more time, which I hate, but yes. Councilor Redfern.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. My name is Chuck Redfern. I live at 9 Colby Street in Keene, and I just want to say that I believe Councilor Greenwald gave a great background to how this came about, but for the benefit of the public, I want to provide a brief explanation of these zones and the legal definition, basically, which reads as follows. And I said legal definition, I immediately thought that the city attorney will have a final say on what the legal definition may be for the state of New Hampshire or whatever, but I want to forewarn him, I'm a student of Google. And I've studied Google terms very, very well, and so I have some general understanding as to what I'm talking about, but that's about as far as it goes. The drug-free zone is a geographical area where the distribution or possession of controlled substances is penalized with a sentence or fine greater than is applicable elsewhere. Areas classified as drug-free zones are generally specified in the state's drug offense laws. Ordinarily, these areas within a certain distance from a school or other place where children are found is classified as a drug-free zone. If an individual is arrested for the possession or distribution of a controlled substance within the drug-free zone, the penalties of the offenses are enhanced. And also, just the pure definition that I found for New Hampshire. For example, state laws set the drug-free zone at 1,000 feet. That means simply that if you're arrested within 1,000 feet of a school, if that's drug-free zone, or other places where children or students congregate. And then I've got another legal definition of drug-free zone, statutorily designated area or place as a public park or beach or school bus area which within the distribution of possession with the intent to distribute a controlled substance is an aggravated felony. And that's pretty much what I have down in writing from the research I did. But I will just go back to the fact that Keene and its citizens have invested significant funds to keep our youth engaged in healthy and active lifestyles. Such examples include, but may not include the Russell Park, Keene Bike Park, Keene Skate Park. Some of these facilities are or soon may be populated near neighborhoods. And so we've put a lot of money into these areas, and I applaud the city of Keene for being so proactive in that area, and specifically the Parks and Rec Director, Andy Bohannon, for being a strong advocate for active, healthy lifestyles for children, for youth and adults. And so that's basically what I'm asking for, and I understand, or it's my guess, that the city attorney will have some input into this conversation. I look forward to listening to that.
Okay.
But does anybody have any questions for me?
I generally ask that question, but I'll
Sorry.
get to you in a moment. Okay, so among questions for the city attorney to consider, who's involved with the enforcement of this? And, can a citizen call in a complaint? I'm sensing that this may walk into similar to what we were hearing before, the difference between state and federal definitions.
Well, the first question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
the very first question you have to ask and answer is, can you do it? Right? I mean, that's the very first question with respect to the parks. And as we have talked about, I wanted to hear what the conversation was this evening, and then I'll look at it a little bit more closely. However, keeping in mind that the state has already designated at least two that I'm aware of, sort of drug-free, authority for drug-free zones. One of them is in schools, and that's been referenced. There's specific statutory language on that under the state law, RSA 193-B, drug-free school zones, and that defines what happens in that kind of context. The other area that the city is empowered to act and create a drug-free zone actually arises under RSA 4717:7. That's the sort of, as you're probably familiar with 4717, that's sort of the general authority granted to cities to adopt ordinances and bylaws for a whole host of different things. Well, in 1991, they created, the state legislature created this authority to create drug-free zones, but it's specific to public housing authority property. So the fact that the state has chosen to provide specific authority in these two contexts makes me question whether or not we have any authority to go beyond that. The reason why I'm not prepared to sort of give you a straight answer tonight is I do have to consider this other statutory section, RSA 47:5, which deals with city property. City councils have the authority for the care and superintendence of all buildings and city property. So we do have rights as a general property owner. So I have to think about that a little bit. But I'm pretty sure I can tell you tonight that even if there is some ability to regulate the idea of unlawful drugs in the context of parks, I'm pretty sure that the authority to enforce that would be very limited. You would not be able to use enhanced penalties or criminal penalties or civil fines or anything like that. And I'm not telling you, and I don't want you or the public to take away from my comments, that I'm going to come back and say, yeah, I think you can do this. Only that I do think that I need to think about it a little bit more only in the context of the rights of the city as a general property owner at this point. But the other question, penalties, criminal enforcement, I think that's just off the table right away.
Okay. And while you're thinking about other things, and Mr. Bohannon is thinking about parks and such, how would the bike path fit into that? So that's a think about it later question. The bike path is not really a park, but it sort of is.
It's, to the extent that it's city-owned property, it would fall into my same
Yeah.
kind of thought process.
Okay.
They actually refer to bike paths as linear parks sometimes. That's a reference that they use.
Okay. Committee have anything else for Council Redfern? Former Council Redfern, yeah.
I guess I'm concerned about increasing the penalties for anything. Is there research out there that shows that increasing the penalties in drug-free zones has an effect? Or is it, is this an intervention that has been shown to work in other places?
Generally, my understanding as to what it does, it's not so much how it motivates the perpetrator of the sale of a controlled substance or whatever, but it does add to letting an officer know that his time is best spent focusing on, whatever has the higher fines or the more regarded in the community as more of an offense for criminal purpose activities and whatnot. So I think they'd be dedicating a little more attention to, the point of sale than what a lot of police departments focus on, trying to catch big fish at a source. This is what I was reading. And but what I think, we've got the state police that handle the big picture, and I'm sure we have city police also doing similar, using similar surveillance techniques at a local level. But again, I think the increase of the penalty will serve as a deterrent. I don't, and there is the thought in some more libertarian elements of the state legislature that definitely would be concerned of increasing fines for activities they consider to be personal choices, that crimes that don't affect others. But I disagree with that. I think society suffers greatly from the illicit use of controlled substances. And so, for example, there was a time period where our city resources were greatly strained because of Narcan having to be administered throughout the city. And in some cases, I know of one case where the user of the drug located himself at a park nearby the fire department. So if his life was in peril, they could give him Narcan. But he was there for, for use of that product. And but it wasn't until it became pretty well known throughout the city what was going on there. But they're still using resources, city resources,
Yeah.
for this
Well,
problem.
I think the city attorney's got a whole laundry list, and if I can add to it, the question of smoke-free.
Well, before we go into that, Mr. Chairman, it is important to point out, especially to the public that's listening, it is important to point out that the possession, sale, transfer, use of substances that are otherwise, controlled and prohibited is still unlawful. Even in the parks. So, it's important to keep that in mind, that we're not creating a special zone in that sense, that it's already unlawful. Important to remember that.
Yes, city manager.
And I have to add one additional comment. As much as we'd like to think we could rely on the state police to address the larger issues of drug addiction or sale in our communities, that's just not the case. Our police department is actively involved in drug investigations in the city and drives a lot of the cases that happen. They work with state and federal authorities, but those resources are very, very limited. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that we rely on the state police to enforce these types of things.
Okay. Thank you.
Just one other point, and then I'll go sit down and give others a chance to speak to you, and I apologize for the length. The city of Keene has an excellent relationship with the New Hampshire Municipal Association. So if there is a state law that needs to be looked at, or a policy review or whatever, we have great avenues within the city of Keene to reach out to the New Hampshire Municipal Association and garner their support. I also came here tonight thinking this would be a fairly easy issue, but if it is more complicated, I can assure you there are resources available to be very persuasive on this matter. For example, Cheshire Medical Center has a public health policy department, and they were pretty substantial in helping on a no smoking ordinance or some controversial issue that they weighed in on, and they made a major difference. So I didn't come, fully geared tonight for anything. I thought this would be pretty simple to forward on through either the city attorney or whatnot.
Yeah,
Back
thank
to
you.
council.
Okay, thank you. Chief had his hand, and then I will recognize the public lady.
Steve Russo, Police Chief. I just want to make sure I leave here with the same understanding of what we're doing. What the city attorney is looking into is what effect with the parks and names and whether we can put signs up, because that's all we can do. Make sure we're all clear that we cannot enact any laws, statutes, or enhancements or anything like that. That would then be almost like the last conversation, is try to get the legislature to include parks in the definition of schools, safe zones, or whatever. Am I correct, Tom? There is-
Essentially, yes.
I want to make sure I leave here with the understanding that's what we're looking at. Would be a sign saying, and we have not had huge luck getting local attorneys or county attorneys to, and not any specific one, to get the enhanced penalty for having sold drugs in school zones. It becomes a legal controversy, and it doesn't, just because we know they sold the drugs there, it's a very difficult process. I just want to let you know.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with it, but I think really it has to be incorporated into the definition at state level. We just unfortunately can't make our own up.
Okay, thanks. Finally, yes.
Hi, Mike. Do you need me to stand up, or can you all hear me? You gotta do it, huh?
Name and
Hi,
address.
Kristen Petrocola, 256 Beaver Street. With this, is alcohol included, or are we just talking controlled drug? I mean, there's frequent misuse of alcohol in this community, so, in places where people shouldn't be drinking it, so I'm just curious.
Well, I think
Thank
there's
you.
another one for the city attorney, but I think already you not supposed to drink at city parks.
There are already limitations with respect to the consumption of alcohol. However, and the Parks Director is here, and I believe wants to speak to this issue before you this evening. There are some exceptions to that that are allowed, but in general, the public consumption of alcohol in the city is already sort of regulated.
Okay, I didn't want to shorten your, you okay? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Monica Marshall, 81 Terrace Street. And I'm here tonight because I've been to the City Council twice this year with proposals to make various parts of Main Street or areas in the city smoke-free. And the last proposal that I made, it wasn't to this committee, although some of you overlapped, was to start with Railroad Square, because in the more than quarter century that I've lived here, Railroad Square has become a place where people with young children or older people or people who don't want to be surrounded by cigarette smoke no longer go to. And my issue hasn't come up, and I just happened to call the clerk today to find out what happened to it. And she told me about this meeting and suggested I come. But since, in between my visits to the city council, I go regularly to Railroad Square, and it is always a very small sliver of our population who use Railroad Square. So my last proposal had to do with, I got some business owners that would be willing to put up a play structure between Railroad Square and the co-op, and we had a whole bunch of people initially who are still very supportive, but since it hasn't come back, they've sort of faded away a little bit, but the co-op would be very supportive of that. And to make that area, again, a place where families feel comfortable. It used to be such a lively place. There were lots of benches, other places to sit, and more people used it. So, in listening to this really fits with what I'm saying. I feel like we're ceding our public spaces just because there are some state laws. And I'm very politically active, and I firmly believe that if we have laws on the book from our state, which is supposed to be a free state, but the cities are given very little freedom as far as I'm concerned. If we can't increase change the quality of life in our city when we see things aren't working, then we should be willing to be sued by the state. Because Railroad Square right now is very minimally used by the vast majority of the population. When we came the first time, it was stated that 85% of the people in our county do not smoke. So basically 15% of the people get to have all of the freedom of being in any space they want. The parks, filled with cigarette butts. And we talked about it last time. We're not expecting police to have to enforce that, but many, many places in the country, including Burlington, for their entire walking street, have put up signs, and it becomes the norm as people get used to that. So, the same thing with drug-free zone. We're not imagining police will be wandering through the parks, but once something is posted, then people are empowered to help make changes in their own city. So it's just really frustrating as a citizen. Some of the state laws are great, and some of the federal laws are great, and they're wonderful, and we should follow them. But others that we can see on the ground are not serving our population and not furthering the increase of quality of life in our city, then I think we should challenge them. And there are so many statutes. I couldn't believe it when I brought the possibility of having just Railroad Square and the bike path to the co-op be smoke-free. It seems like a no-brainer in a certain way. But then there were so many layers of, well, this piece is owned by the state and this piece is owned by the city. And it seems like we are then not empowered to make our own city better. So I just really want to encourage us in Keene, as I said before, as we did with the no smoking in restaurants. We were one of the first in the state, and it was illegal to do that then, to really look at what's needed for our city. And I often walk between, use that little path next to what's going to be Patricia Russell Park. And it infuriates me, and I used to take my classes there as a shortcut, and we'd clean it up. But to just, we're doing something now with Patricia Russell Park, which we should really be proud of. It's going to be a beautiful space, and we should be thinking proactively, who do we want to use that? How can we make it the most friendly to the most people in our community, not just, well, we can't do it because of this law or that law. So that's why I'm here today, to support this, and also to bring back this idea of making our parks smoke-free. I'll just end with one little thing. I was part of the cleanup at Robin Hood Park on Earth Day. And so I went through the park, and the park was actually really pretty good. Then we came around to the parking lot where there are garbage cans, and I picked up 500 cigarette butts. You can imagine my mood by the time I walked home. All within 10 feet of the garbage cans. It's just like people go there and they must empty their ashtrays on the ground at Robin Hood, but there's no sign. If there was a sign and you saw someone doing that, you'd have some recourse to point it out to them. This isn't the way we want to treat our city. And the cleaning up after your dog signs, they're getting more and more, really like take some responsibility for cleaning up after your dog or not littering here. We don't want littering in our city. So I'd like to see us be more proactive and allowing the largest group of us in the population to be free to use every part of our city. So thank you.
Thank you. Totally agree with you.
Any question?
And just to reassure you, your request didn't go away.
That's okay.
It's hanging in a category called more time items. It's kind of purgatory, but it's still alive. And regarding Railroad Square, I am aware of some complex title issues and who owns what and what do we have the rights to enforce, and it's very, very frustrating, but it will get there. Yeah.
Alluding to that, just over to the city manager, I know the city clerk's not here. I know it's on more time. Do we have an idea? Are we pulling off more time this next cycle?
So, in fact, we were hoping that we were going to incorporate Ms. Marshall's conversation in this potential ordinance change, and I think once Andy gets up and talks a little bit, we'll talk more about that, but incorporating it in the parks conversation.
Good.
Okay.
So Director Bohannon, can you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Andy Bohannon, Parks, Recreation Facilities Director. So summer happened, and this was supposed to be back before you, and we had taken a look at this back in June related to updating Chapter 58, which is related to Parks and Recreation in all of our spaces. And at this time, so what we reviewed, and because we were looking to define parks and how we use them, and looking at that definition, it's more about the spaces that we call parks as opposed to what is in parks. So, and part of that, and there's a lot of different language that has been brought up tonight, related to the alcohol, to smoking is not part of that currently, but just to call out the alcohol, just so everybody has a full understanding, alcohol is not allowed in any of our parks except in certain designated areas within Wheelock Park. There are designated areas, what they call out of an L shape for the softball league, and family, or not family, but designated picnic areas within that particular space. But that's the only space within our city parks that you would be able to consume alcohol. All of the parks, there's no glass allowed, so to trim that back, obviously glass is a very dangerous element, but it also contains a lot of alcohol, and we don't want those to be mixing. Related to the smoking, so taking a look back, I can't remember a specific time frame, but we worked with Healthy Monadnock and the Coalition for Tobacco-Free Communities to put signs up around our playgrounds that said, please no smoking here. We made the rec center a designated area of no smoking in front of the building. But I think it's time that we make all of our parks, as Councilor Greenwald brought forward related to Russell Park, some of the skate parks coming on board. We have potential dog park, potential disc golf. You have a great bike park, and all these environments are attracting a lot of people. And so we want those to be friendly and used and healthy, and so designating all of our parks smoke-free is really the right direction to do that. Now, I would also take into consideration that Central Square and Railroad Square are both different spaces and not parks. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. However, we do have a resolution that does call out specific language for those particular uses. We can go in and update that particular resolution at the same time that we're doing the ordinance, so that everything becomes in line all together all at once. With that, And trails are, I heard trails mentioned a little bit earlier. The Assistant City Attorney and I have been kind of talking about this, and trails kind of fall in that. Because some of our trails, even though our rail trails are on city property, the state, we have an agreement with the state. So we have to look at that kind of combination. But adding the new Cheshire Rail Trail Phase 3, opening up very soon with our designated trailheads, looking at some of those spaces. Earlier this week, we did a major cleanup at the Ashwillet Rail Trail trailhead. Very alarming things that we found there for a certain designated spot. So keeping the signage up and making it more educational is going to need to happen. And so, but with the time frame that we can come back to, just because of some of the things happening in September, we would like to bring it back. So October 6th would be your first reading at the council level for a new ordinance change, and then come through the October 12th MSFI process. Actually, it's not that, correct, because you're skip a meeting. So it would have to be at the end of that month. But then you would have that first adoption opportunity at the beginning of November.
So there would be no need for committee input at the September MSFI meeting?
I unfortunately, yeah.
Not asking for the ordinance at that point, but maybe just,
I'm trying to think, because I wasn't thinking about the second cycle. I will be present in here, so I could definitely be, if we're ready to tune that up for the end of September.
bearing in mind that we only meet once a month now.
Yes, I forgot that,
Yeah.
so I think we could probably make that happen. That would be the September 15th council meeting that it gets introduced. Let me just make sure that I'm here.
Yes.
I think my suggestion might be, I was just chattering, whispering with the city manager. I haven't seen it yet either. The assistant city attorney and the public works director have been working on this diligently. I would like to review it as well.
Yeah.
But I think that my suggestion might be to, without introducing it as an ordinance yet, we could provide it to MSFI to review, and that way, if you have any suggestions or comments before we actually introduce it as an ordinance, because I'd rather do that, frankly, than introduce it as an ordinance, have it come to the committee look at it and say, yeah, but, and then we're doing an A or a B or something like that. And that would give Andy and Amanda an opportunity to consider your comments and other public comments with respect to it before we sort of hard-code it into an ordinance.
Exactly what I was thinking, but you said it so much better. And bear in mind that every time we change the letter, it's another month, the way.
Unfortunately, I know I will not be present here for the September meeting.
We'll miss you.
The MSFI.
But I think that's all right, because basically what we'd be looking for is your input, any public input, that kind of thing, at that point.
It'll all be tuned up
Right.
for that.
Okay, anything, yes, Bobby?
Just to say that, while I support the idea of smoke-free parks, I'm a little concerned that on the edges of these parks, there's going to be impromptu smoking zones. And maybe it's better that we build designated smoking zones, or at least the authority to create them if necessary, into the ordinance.
Interesting. Yeah, we could have designated drug zones and drinking zones, but smoking, I unfortunately might have to agree with you.
Well, and I think
Otherwise-
I believe we have precedent for that at the library campus. We created a designated area for people, and with receptacles, so hopefully the folks
Yeah.
out there.
That might make it more successful, actually. If someone is smoking at a Little League game, you could say, go over there, that might work, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to piggyback on that. One of my concerns when I read this was any increased fines or anything like that for the drug-free aspect, but also as vilified as smoking tobacco is, it isn't a criminal act. And we really are, yes, it can be annoying to non-smokers to be out in the community and go past a cloud of smoke or the litter of cigarette butts, but I would hope that this, when we're talking about designating any smoke-free zones, that we also include more receptacles for cigarette butts, specifically cigarette butts, not just garbage receptacles, because we don't want to start fires either. So, thank you.
Thanks. Yes, anything?
Yep. Clearly, no matter what we do isn't perfect, but doing nothing's not an option. So let's try to do the best we can and move forward. And like we do with a lot of things, we correct it down the road if we find there's a flaw. But I think we do need to move forward.
Councilor Jones?
Thank you. Phil Jones, City Councilor. We can go a lot of different ways with this, but I would ask if maybe we could at least make it a goal to have a no smoking and let those groups who use that park know that one of our city goals is to not have smoking. Now, I coached many years for what was then called the Allison Barden League. It was a girls' softball league for young girls, and we had our own rules that said no smoking at the games. And I, as a coach, if one of the parents was sitting in the stands and lit up a cigarette, I had to go tell them to put it out. I said, "You're violating one of our rules, our policies of the Allison Barden League." I think Babe Ruth League has the same thing. I kind of like Bobby's idea because of having designated areas, because we do attract tournaments which are good economically for the city. Some of the softball tournaments we do, we get people from Rhode Island and Connecticut and New York and every place else. And part of that reason why we do well with is because we do have that little beer garden area that they can use. So I think we might lose them if we restricted the smoking, but if, as Bobby says, if we had a designated area where they can go away from the general public, that might work also. But I'm not here to talk about that now. I'm just saying we should let those who are using our spaces let it know that it is one of our goals to restrict smoking in any way we can. And if they can make it part of their policy, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So, anything further from, yep.
Just so it's clear in my understanding, we're going to do an ordinance on smoke-free zones, or expand that, but we're not taking up an ordinance for drug-free zones?
No, we're doing both.
We're doing both, okay.
Well, the drug-free aspect of this is not now included in the changes to Chapter 58. As I said, one of the things I want to do is take a little closer look at the issue with respect to doing it at all. I think at a minimum, as the chief pointed out, we may be able to put up a sign that says drug-free zone, but what we do with it after that is very open to question. As I've said, I understand that Mr. Redfern has pointed out enhanced penalties, but as we have discussed, I think that's clearly off the table at this point. So at least at the moment, we know we can proceed with changes to Chapter 58 and include in those tobacco-free aspects of it. 5 years ago, I would have told you that's a little bit questionable, but I think the consensus of opinion around the state at this point is clearly that we can do exactly that with tobacco. But drugs are a different story.
I'm on another mission.
if in fact we come back after the city attorney has concluded his research, and that is the case, what we could do, if the council was interested, is do something similar to your first motion and request that parks be added to the statute that allows drug-free zone enhanced penalties, if that was something you were
Okay,
interested in doing.
I'm glad we're having this clarification conversation, because it was, what I was hearing and hoping to hear is that you have all this research to do what we can and can't do regarding drugs and cigarettes, and at the next MSFI meeting, we'll find out. And
Yes.
if we can do,
We know we can do the tobacco, let's
Yeah.
put it that way. And we have incorporated the tobacco already, as far as I understand. Again, I haven't seen the ordinance draft yet myself, but we've incorporated that. The question is the drugs.
Yes.
And I'd rather keep those two conversations separate.
okay. And perhaps you'll find we can, or we can't. Good. Anything further? Good, we managed to drag this out for an hour. Okay, anything further from the public? Councilors? No. You, please, Councilor Moore-Time.
I move to recommend that the communication be placed on more time to allow the city attorney to research these issues.
And a second
Second.
by Council Filio. Anything further, committee? All in favor? Good, thank you. So, our agenda being complete, we are now adjourned. I thank the staff for being here. We had members of the public and counselor and an alumni counselor. Thank you for coming. Good evening.
Good discussion.
Pretty good.